Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Once upon a time, in a kingdom far away, there lived a kind and beautiful princess named Snow White. Her name was no coincidence, for her skin was as white as snow, her lips as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. She was beloved by everyone in the kingdom, everyone except her stepmother, the queen. The queen was vain and proud, and she possessed a magical mirror that she would consult every day. Mirror, mirror on the wall, she would ask, "Who is the fairest of them all?" For years, the mirror always replied, "You, my queen, are the fairest of them all." Hearing this would fill the queen with pride, for nothing mattered to her more than her beauty. But one day, the queen received a different answer. "You, my queen, are fair, it's true," the mirror said, "but Snow White is now fairer than you." The queen's heart burned with jealousy. How dare this child surpass her beauty? Consumed by envy, the queen devised a cruel plan. She summoned a huntsman, a loyal servant of the castle, and commanded him to take Snow White deep into the forest and kill her. "Bring me back her heart," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I need proof." The huntsman obeyed, though he was deeply troubled. Snow White, innocent and unsuspecting, followed him into the dark woods. When they had gone far enough that no one could hear them, the huntsman drew his knife, but his hands trembled. Snow White looked at him with wide, trusting eyes, and he could not bring himself to harm her. "Run, Snow White," he whispered urgently. "The queen wishes to end your life. You must flee and never return to the castle." Snow White's heart pounded with fear, but she nodded, tears streaming down her face. She fled into the forest, her gown catching on branches and her feet stumbling over roots. The huntsman, unable to return empty-handed, killed a wild boar and brought its heart to the queen. She believed it was Snow White's heart and felt victorious, certain that her rival was gone forever. Meanwhile, Snow White ran deeper and deeper into the forest. The woods were dark and foreboding, filled with eerie sounds. Shadows loomed like monsters, and strange animals darted past her. Exhausted and terrified, she finally collapsed near a babbling brook. When morning came, Snow White awoke to the sound of birds chirping. She followed a small path until she came upon a clearing where a quaint little cottage stood. The house was small and charming, with a thatched roof and a garden filled with wildflowers. Desperate for shelter, Snow White knocked on the door, but no one answered. She pushed it open and stepped inside. The cottage was unlike anything she had ever seen. Everything was small: the chairs, the table, even the tiny beds in the corner. There were 7 of everything, and the house was untidy, with dishes piled up and dust on the shelves. Snow White, being kind and industrious, decided to clean up. She swept the floors, washed the dishes, and even cooked a pot of soup. Once the house was tidy, she curled up on the beds, too small for her, and fell fast asleep. That evening, the 7 dwarfs who lived in the cottage returned from their work in the nearby diamond mines. Their names were Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. They were surprised to see their home clean and neat, and even more shocked to find Snow White asleep across their beds. "Who is this young woman?" Doc, the leader, asked, stroking his beard. "She's pretty," said Bashful, blushing. "Maybe she's a witch," grumbled Grumpy. Snow White awoke to their chatter and sat up, startled. But when she saw the 7 dwarfs, she smiled kindly. "Please don't be afraid," she said. "My name is Snow White. I mean no harm. I was lost in the forest and found your home. I'll leave if you want me to." The dwarfs listened as she told them her story, and their hearts softened. "You can stay," said Dog, "but be careful. The queen might try to find you." Grateful, Snow White promised to keep their house clean and cook for them in return. The dwarfs quickly grew fond of her, for her laughter brought warmth to their home. Every morning, they went off to the mines, warning her to be cautious. "Don't open the door to strangers," Doc said sternly. Back at the castle, the queen asked her mirror once again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" To her shock, the mirror replied, "Snow White, who dwells with the 7 dwarfs, is the fairest of them all." The queen's rage was uncontrollable. She realized the huntsman had deceived her. Determined to destroy Snow White, she disguised herself as an old peddler woman and set off for the dwarf's cottage with a poisoned apple. When Snow White saw the old woman at the door, she hesitated, but the woman smiled kindly and held out a shiny red apple. "A gift, my dear," she crooned. "One bite will bring you happiness." Snow White, trusting as always, took the apple and bit into it. As soon as the fruit touched her tongue, she fell to the ground, unconscious. The queen cackled triumphantly and vanished into the forest. When the dwarfs returned home that evening, they found Snow White lying lifeless on the floor. They tried everything to wake her, but the poisoned apple had done its work. Believing her dead, the dwarfs were overcome with grief. They built a glass coffin for her and placed it in a sunny glade in the forest. Day and night they kept watch, mourning their beloved friend. Many months passed, and one day a prince riding through the forest came upon the glass coffin. He was struck by Snow White's beauty and asked the dwarfs about her. "She is the most beautiful woman I have ever seen," he said. "Please allow me to take her to my castle. I will honor her memory." Reluctantly, the dwarfs agreed. As the prince's servants lifted the coffin, they stumbled, and the piece of poisoned apple dislodged from Snow White's throat. She gasped and opened her eyes. The prince knelt beside her, his heart filled with joy. "You're alive," he exclaimed. "Will you come with me to my castle?" Snow White smiled, and the dwarfs cheered, overjoyed to see her awake. She agreed to marry the prince, and together they journeyed to his kingdom. When the queen asked her mirror, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" the mirror replied, "Snow White, who now reigns as queen, is the fairest of them all." The queen's jealousy consumed her, and she fled the castle in despair, never to be seen again. Snow White and the prince were married in a grand celebration, with the 7 dwarfs as honored guests. Their kingdom flourished, filled with laughter, kindness, and love. And so, Snow White lived happily ever after. The end.